We are um, in the second of our four Zoom forums where we are trying to facilitate conversation all about following Jesus in the public square. How do we live with both compassion and conviction and truth and grace? And we're founding a chapter of the AND campaign here in LA. You all are aware. December 2nd is when we're launching. And so until that point, we're doing these four Zoom forums, trying to engage and do some coalition building and spreading the word about what we're doing and producing some content that people can continue to use for our chapter. And so for our first Zoom forum last week, we had Dr. Michael Emerson with us. That was great. We'll have it up on the YouTube video or the YouTube channel. Put that content up. And today, for our second, we have the honor of having Pastor Chris Butler with us. He co-authored this book that everyone in our chapter is required to read to become chapter members at some point over the course of the first year. And we got plenty of copies to give away. And so really excited to have you, Chris, with us specifically because you've been involved with AND since the beginning and have had such a significant voice in the shaping of it. And we're really excited for you to be here to talk specifically about the question, how can we engage seriously in politics, in the public square, without compromising our faith in Jesus, our allegiance to him, seeking to follow him, and have both of those two tensions that we're able to hold. And you've done it. And a lot of us have gotten to listen to you kind of processing the doing of it, running for office, being a pastor, all of that. And so really glad that you're here with us. Real quick note, we'll be doing some Q&A at the end. And so be jotting down the questions that you have as you're hearing and processing, whether they're specific to understanding more of what he's talking about, or maybe there's some application and trying to wrestle through a specific instance that you might have going on. And then we'll go from there. So Pastor Chris, thanks for being here with us, man.
Awesome. I am really, really glad and excited to be with y'all, even though, it is well past my bedtime at this point. But I have a brother in San Diego, so I go through this plenty. And I sympathize with Brent also because I actually left the church and went home to help get our 5 kids situated. And then there would have been no chance of me being able to do this from home. So I came back to the church.
Oh, you champion. My goodness.
to do this.
Thank you.
But yeah, I mean, that is really, I think, by way of introduction, I always do like to start with saying that I am probably like the luckiest dude on the planet. Like I have just a really, really dope family. My wife is my ace, my friend, and just one of the most all around amazing women you ever want to meet. And I questioned before the Lord daily why she married me, but she did. And so I'm grateful for that. And then we have 6 children. They are 12, 10, 8, 6, 2, and 1 is going to be born soon.
Oh man,
this month. So we are fully loaded there, but I love home as the center of my world, and I'm really grateful for that. And also get the privilege of pastoring a really amazing church. We are a congregation of about 150, 160 people in the south side of Chicago and south suburbs. And again, just like a really beautiful group of people striving to love each other, love the Lord, serve our community. And I'm just humbled to be able to serve the local church in that capacity. And then I get to serve with the AND campaign. So I'm, as you all know, I co-host a podcast with Justin Gibney, get to be a part of the executive team, and grateful for just all the opportunities to move around the national and be a part of the Chicago chapter. So I feel like among the national leaders, I have that kind of unique privilege of being really involved with the national organization, but also being really involved with the local chapter. I'm very, very grateful for that. So my background is in church and in politics. I like to say I grew up on the front row of the church and on the front lines of kind of justice work. Because my family was very church involved. My mom, directing the children's choir and teaching Sunday school, and my dad driving the church van and all that type of thing. And we were in church, seemed like every day. But when I was at some moment, I was not in church, and I was in my elementary school, the local school council, which in Chicago we have these school boards at every school called the local school council, and they have the power to hire and fire principals. They were going to get rid of my principal in the 6th grade, the grammar school that I was in, and I liked the principal. A lot of the students liked her. They probably were thinking about other aspects of the job than just whether we liked her. But in 6th grade, it's about, do you like the principal? And we liked her, and we didn't want to get fired. So we started going to local school council meetings and being disruptive so that they couldn't conduct the business of getting rid of this principal. And then a local community organization, the South Austin Coalition, got involved with that fight. And I kind of attach myself to the coalition. And so in 6th grade, 12 years old, got super involved with community work, registering folks to vote and organizing block clubs and all this type of stuff, and really stuck in that. So by the time I was in high school, I was organizing students to sort of push back against the standardized testing regime in Chicago, actually beat a standardized test here and got it taken down. Studied, political science in college, and actually in the middle of that study, took a break to help out with a Senate campaign for this funny name fellow who was running for the United States Senate here in Illinois. And so I coordinated youth and adults with Barack Obama's Senate campaign, and that worked out. Was able to have more opportunities there in electoral politics and campaign management and those types of things. Went from there to work in some education reform, different areas of education funding and education reform here in the state. Got to build a big statewide coalition, lobby in Springfield, work on school choice issues. And so after all of that, I started with my brother a consulting firm and thought we were going to do that for a very long time until 2016, church showed back up in my life because we were running a consulting firm, but I was very church involved at this point. Not looking for a vocational ministry post, but I was the guy who would preach once or twice a year at church and teach some Christian ed here and there. But that was the extent of my service. But in 2016, the church was really suffering in some significant ways. And so I did take some time away just to go and pray for the church, because I loved this church before I pastored this church when I was just a member here. I really loved the church. I took that time to pray. Really felt like God was putting some things on my heart that could help the church. And so I did what a good consultant does. I made a PowerPoint presentation and I went to see my pastor. And it was in that meeting, after I made my whole PowerPoint presentation, my pastor told me that he had been diagnosed with cancer and was going to have to take some time off for treatment, and that he had been praying about who should be the interim. And based on the fact that I came in the middle of that prayer and that I had this PowerPoint presentation, he was like, I'm going to recommend to the church that you do it. And so we talked about that. My wife and I, we prayed through it, and we made that recommendation. He made the recommendation to the church. The church accepted the recommendation. And after a year of treatment, he was well, is well. I told somebody he's working at Together Chicago now, helping them do that work. But he went to Together Chicago because after that year, I think he looked around and said, I'm, over 60. And I remember he told me, after a year of battling cancer, still my blood pressure is lower than it was when I was pastoring at church. So why don't we go to the church and talk to the church about you staying on as the pastor. So we did that, and the church accepted that as well. And so I started pastoring the church, left the consulting firm, and started doing that. And so I'm going somewhere with all this. This is not just me being late night chatty. I was doing that work. I was doing pastoring and had come out of the work of working in a lot of politics very intensely. That was my professional life, was in politics. And so I was looking for ways to sort of marry the two, and had a pretty devastating experience right there in the early part of my pastorate. There was an open seat in the city council, and I had been recommended for the seat by the guy who was leaving the seat. And in the midst of those conversations, essentially came to a point in the conversation where I was asked about my two things. One was a conversation that I had with this committee about abortion. And I was given what I thought were very enlightened and thoughtful answers to the question. But I remember one person actually laughed and was like, "Don't ever say that again." And so I thought that was probably a hiccup in the process. And then when I actually met with the mayor, one of the questions, when I got to ask questions, what are you looking for and somebody who you would appoint? And one of the things was loyalty. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to be very loyal to my values, to my community. But I can't just sign up for blank loyalty to, an individual who is not Jesus Christ. So that went south. And it was kind of devastating for me because it was the first time that I began to feel like maybe I couldn't pastor and be involved in local politics. And it was actually during that season that I was in Atlanta. I think I was there for a birthday party, I'm pretty sure. But I was talking to somebody about this experience. And he was like, "You got to meet my friend Justin." And so that's how I got connected with Justin. He was in the very early stages of developing what has become the AND campaign. But it was that connection and that ability to have conversation and community where we're really thinking about, we can do this, that was able to sustain me in staying more involved in being a church leader and still being involved in civics, being involved in politics. Y'all know I ran for Congress a couple years ago. Yeah, a couple years ago, almost a couple years ago, whatever. Ran for Congress. I did not win, but it was a very good learning experience. And so I give all that background to basically say that this is like the life that I'm living every day. So still today, I'll consult with campaigns. Still today, as I told you, I'm very much involved with the Chicago AND campaign. I write a lot, take positions on issues, some of them popular, some of them unpopular. But I'm there, being public. In the last mayoral election, we organized a candidate forum with through the AND campaign Chicago chapter, and so we do this type of stuff, and it's an interesting road to walk. But that's kind of the background that I think is the most important part, and I just want to share a few things that I think are important
Mm-hmm.
for being able to do this and do it well. And then I'm going to be quiet. We can talk, and then we'll be done. So
Great.
number one, the first thing I thought about was that you really want to be aware of your context. It's not lost on me that I pastor a predominantly Black Assembly of God church in Chicago, right? So we have a very sort of Black church orientation in terms of a church in a Black community where historically the church was the center of a lot of life. So the church sat at the center of community, economics, community, social life, and politics. And so politics being discussed in a Black church environment is not completely abnormal. And I recognize that that is not the same in every church tradition. And so you have to be aware of that. I am in an AG church, right? So a lot of the things that I do in Chicago and in my political endeavor is, shall we say, strange sometimes to folks within my fellowship denominationally. If you don't know, the AG is a fairly white conservative denomination. So those dynamics are at play. And so you want to be aware of all of those things, your context, your local congregational context, right? So I pastor a congregation where I grew up. So a lot of people who were here when I started pastoring knew me from a child. So they knew, before I started pastoring, I was running a public affairs consulting firm. So if you get a guy coming out of science, you might get a lot of chemistry illustrations in the sermons, right? So people kind of knew where I was coming from, my orientation. And so it's really important, I think, for every person to know, to be aware of, and have respect for their own context, right? Chicago itself is just a really political city. I don't know how it became that way, but it is. A lot of people are involved in politics. So be aware of your context, and you really got to honor your context. You can't do everything that somebody else is doing because you're not in their context, right? So I think that's really important. So the second thing that I would say is also to be aware and be sure about your why. So I think it's really important to understand, if you're going to be a Christian at all, especially if you're a church leader and you're going to get involved in politics, you got to be sure about why you are getting involved, because so many people who are involved in politics are involved for what I would say are the wrong reasons. That's my judgment. But I can definitely say the reasons are very different from what a believer might be getting in for. So we, at the AND campaign, you all know this, we talk a lot about politics and civics being a vehicle to live out that great commandment of Jesus to love your neighbor, a great platform to be in pursuit of what we call the great requirement to do justice and love mercy, and politics and civics is a great platform for that. Getting into politics vocationally, I think, and I have experienced, is also a great platform to pursue the Great Commission. I think some of the most effective discipleship that I have done was in the context of the consulting firm. So if you're getting in for those reasons, that's going to dictate a certain type of behavior. That's going to dictate a certain approach to decision making. It's going to dictate a certain approach to forming relationships and interacting in relationships. And you're getting into a world where a lot of people, maybe even the majority of people at this moment, are in it for very different reasons. And so they have a very different set of dictates when it comes to decision making, when it comes to forming relationships, and just the moves that people make. If you lose your why, you are at risk of beginning to move like other people in politics. And that is very dangerous because they're making the moves that they're making because they are in it to build power, to make money, to, sort of self-aggrandize. And if those are not your reasons, you got to be very clear about that and keep that sort of front and center. The third thing, and I only have four, is to be very serious about spiritual disciplines. So this is one of the things that I talk about when I'm talking personally with folks who are involved in civics and politics and who want to walk upright before the Lord in the environment, is to be very serious about spiritual disciplines. You might imagine that I, as a pastor, think that everybody should always be serious about spiritual disciplines. But these rhythms and practices that remind you really of what I was just talking about, I think that this is why I think spiritual disciplines are so important, is because spiritual disciplines represent rhythms and practices that constantly remind you that you are not like everybody else that may be in the coalition, at the organization, on the campaign, wherever you are in the space. And so to be serious and be disciplined about prayer and meditation and confession and community and Sabbath and study and all those disciplines, to really be serious about them and have those formed into your life in a real way is really important, because I think the great danger in politics is for the Christian is that you can lose yourself, because there's so many forces and people who don't approach it the way that you do and the way that you ought to be. I think one of the very best ways to make sure that you don't lose yourself is to have good, strong rhythms and spiritual disciplines in your life. Because if you're in community and you have these disciplines, those disciplines will tell on you either to yourself or to somebody else. If you always go to church, then all of a sudden you don't ever go to church anymore, somebody will be able to know, hey, Chris is not showing up at church. And you'll be able to notice, that I'm not taking my Sabbath, whatever day that is that I'd set aside for Sabbath. I've now allowed this campaign to infringe on the Sabbath. I haven't practiced confession. So when you have those disciplines built in, there will be red flags available long before you do something terrible and get too far. And then, so the last thing that I think is important is to be willing to lose. There have been a number of significant junctures in my life at this point. I talked about one already. I'm a political professional. I've been around politics basically all my life. So when I'm sitting there and I'm talking to folks and people start asking questions about abortion in that, automatic interview, I'm not stupid. I know, number one, these questions are coming from politically interested parties because city council doesn't even make any rules about abortion. So this is not about policy making. This is politics. Somebody's political interest is being served by asking this question. And because I'm, in a democratic, environment, and these are Democratic Party folks that I'm talking to, I can also guess how you want me to answer that question. And so I get to decide, I have to decide right there in that moment, how am I going to play this, right? Like, am I going to keep to my values, knowing that I'll probably put the seat at risk? There's going to be a risk that I don't get this appointment if I stick to my values. Or am I going to hold my values loose so that I can get the seat. Similar thing happened in the congressional race. We were organizing the race. We were not in it to lose, which I should say, when I say be willing to lose, that is not the same as saying get in it to lose, right? Like the goal is not to lose. Politics is about winning. And so you should be trying to win, not trying to lose. I don't think there's particular virtue in losing in and of itself. So we got into campaigns not to lose. We saw a path to victory. One of the pieces of calculus that we had done is that we knew that why am I blanking on this earth-shattering decision? The abortion decision. Somebody help me. Overturns Roe.
Oh,
Dobbs.
Thank
yeah.
you. So we knew Dobbs was going to be taken up by the court, but we had a mid-June primary and figured that Dobbs would be like the last decision that the court would decide and announce during that session, which would put that decision late June. So we thought, you can get this primary done before the decision. So we could be in an environment where abortion won't be the conversation in the primary. Once you get the primary in Chicago, whoever gets the Democratic nomination is going to win. That was the play. So Dobbs leaks in December. And one of several things happen. A lot of people start pulling away from the campaign because while abortion wasn't the focus of this campaign, several people knew my positions on life and stuff. But the main conversation that I would point to is the lady who was our campaign finance chair, the person who raises the money. We had a conversation. She actually called me and was like, are you going to stay where you are on abortion? And I'm like, yes, I am. And she's like, well, I can't help. And so that changed the dynamic because now you're talking about running a campaign with a lot less money than you planned. And because not only is she not going to help raise money, you can also understand from that conversation, a lot of people who were going to give money will probably not be giving that money based on this issue. And so we had, I had probably in the course of, 3 days, about 15 or 16 conversations like this from, the folks who were, most of the high rollers, were very concerned about this issue. And so again, we had the opportunity to be like, are we going to hold to this value and, watch this campaign go differently, or we could just change I could change my position. Because my campaign finance person is basically, if you change right now, forget about anything you ever said, written, or done. Just change it right now, and we're good. And so we had that first decision. And then when people stopped giving, certain people stopped giving. Let me not say people stopped giving. A lot of people did give to the campaign. I'm very grateful for those contributions. But we were running a very different kind of campaign. And then we also had another decision to make, like, do we just step out of the campaign, go do something else, or do we stay in and raise this and other issues in this primary, since we do have a platform and a voice. And so all the time you gotta get in to win, but you gotta be willing to lose. We say in the end campaign that your witness is more important than your win. But especially when you're local, like, you've got to be willing to live that out, because while I thank God for the ability to, that he walked me through these very important junctures, I think the very first time you go the other way in local politics, you lose a ton of credibility, right? Because if you're the Christian guy, the preacher, and then you flip on an issue that you've been out there talking about, writing about, organizing around, and then you're just all of a sudden different. You lose so much credibility. And I feel like the higher you go up in politics, the further you are away from kind of like the grassroots, the less that matters, honestly. But in the community, if you lose your credibility, I think it becomes very difficult to maneuver. So I promised that I would stop talking. And so I'm going to fulfill that promise right here and cut it.
No, it's all good. I think we could listen to you tell stories about front lines of repping Jesus in the civic square all day, all night. For you, it's almost already midnight. So yeah, wanna listen, but also, yeah, I think some good questions are probably rising to the surface for us. Hearing some of this wisdom that you're sharing, so good. I'm selfishly really curious, not selfishly, but I'm really curious. I can imagine I'm pastor of a church, and just imagining what does it look like? What did it look like on Sundays for you? Like you're running for public office and you're pastoring people. I'm sure, you got help on Sundays and things, but people in the church know. Like you got people that weren't going to vote for you in in the church and like
Oh, yes.
all that, and then you got people that are like grandstanding you, and you got to be able to still pastor people. Like what was that like? What was it like being a Christian in a community of faith where you're also running for public office?
Yeah, so that's a very, very good question. When I first felt a sort of a desire to run for Congress, the first conversation I had was with the Lord. And then I, poured over the available data to see if I thought that, if I convinced myself that there was a path. When I cleared those two hurdles, I talked to my wife. When she said, this seems like something that we can do, that we should do, I talked to my pastor. After I talked to my pastor, we called the meeting at the church, right? So we had a special business meeting at the church where I laid this out in front of the church and put it to a vote, right? Because I don't think if you are the time requirement of running for Congress is too great for a pastor of a local congregation to undertake without the full support of that congregation. And that support doesn't mean, as you said, doesn't mean that everybody's going to vote for you, doesn't mean everybody's going to give to your campaign, volunteer in your campaign, those are the kind of things that we laid out in the meeting, right? If I run for Congress, that doesn't mean that the folks in this church automatically have to vote for me, automatically have to give to me, automatically have to work for me. That's not it. We know actually that we have political diversity inside of the congregation. We've had conversations. We already know that. So this is just saying, is the church willing to take up that extra responsibility, right? So we're going to have, because what that looks like for the church is we're going to have other members of the pastoral team preaching and guests doing a lot of preaching, right? Because I'm not going to be able to be preaching as regularly because of the preparation, blah blah blah. We're going to have other folks doing the lion's share of the care and the visitation and all that type of stuff. Even though we were in COVID, so visitation was different, but the church needed to participate in that decision-making process. And so because the church participated in the decision-making, it was easier to be able to meet with the leadership and the staff, make a plan for how we're going to cover everything. And that freed me up to do the things I need to do in the time that I was campaigning.
Man, love that. Really, really helpful to hear the practicals of it. What sort of questions we got? What are we mulling over right now?
Yeah, if I could just say thank you so much for dropping in with us. It's been great. I'm actually running a little Instagram thing here, so if you want to say hello to the folks, we got Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. So
greetings to the people on
yes,
Instagram.
yes. Yep. So my question is I really appreciated your insights. This sounds like a really difficult line to straddle. Are there other people you've seen do it well, who have done a great job politically, and also stuck to their convictions in a truth and love sort of way? Yeah, what are some names of folks we could learn from?
Yeah, so I have, kind of probably top of mind historical figure Adam Clayton Powell. I think is a really strong example of being a pastor, a theologian, and a serious political leader. Um, you know, there's there are a number of folks who I could point to in Chicago who just have really provided a lot of insight and example. I think about the Reverend James Meeks. So Reverend Meeks actually served in the state senate for a long time. And he actually carried the bill on education reform that I actually lobbied on. And the statewide coalition that I talked about, we built that coalition around that bill that Reverend Meeks carried. And he was probably the closest example, right? Because I was able to see him not so much as a clergyman, because I wasn't in his church, but I was able to see him as a senator. And it was very clear that his walk with Jesus impacted and, dare I say, guided, dictated, was the prevailing motivation for how he conducted himself in Springfield, and that really spoke to me, because I don't know how other state capitals are. I really don't know even how the United States Capitol is, but in Springfield, a lot of people are kind of different when they are down in Springfield than when they are back in Chicago. And so to see Reverend Meeks just move in such integrity, and at the beginning of the process, Meeks didn't know at all, that I was eyeing him that closely or that deeply, and so this, I'm sure, was not performance for me. It was just how he did his thing. So he was a great example. Reverend Marshall Hatch, I got to grow up around him on the west side of Chicago when I was but a lad, seeing him, handle his pulpit well, really handle his congregation well, but still be a very present person in the community, a very present voice on issues of justice there when the community needed him, but still, just really great in terms of preaching and handling his pulpit and handling his congregation. I knew families who were part of his congregation, and he didn't miss a beat in terms of pastoring them. And so many great examples that I get to benefit from.
That's great. It's great. Thank you, Chris. Good question, Paul. Alex,
Chris,
you got a question?
yeah, Chris, I'm in a evangelical church where I've kind of gotten support to or blessing to do like civic engagement, political work. But I think our lead pastor isn't, at the end of the day, completely on board. I think he's like nervous when it comes to like the church getting involved in politics, and at the end of the day feels like the church should kind of focus on preaching the gospel and evangelism and discipleship, and shouldn't be actively engaged in politics. And I'm curious to hear if you have some stories you can share about how you feel like your work in politics actually supported kind of witness and evangelism, or the Great Commission, or however you want to say it, kind of people coming to know Jesus, and how that can actually be a benefit to that cause.
Yeah, for sure. And I think in my local congregational context, and also in my interactions with my denominational fellowship, there is this, more so with the denomination, there's a little bit more of the tension about, should we not just be, as folks like to say it, preaching the gospel. But I think the dictates and the implications of the gospel in every society where we've ever seen the gospel enter have political implications. And so even when I talk about this, I don't necessarily talk about the church being political. It's more about the church understanding the political implications of the gospel, right? And so if we, so I won't spend like a whole set of time, but if we have this gospel impulse, right, to go to the oppressed and the least of these, and if we know from 1 Corinthians that God is calling those who are not, who are nothing in this world, and all these things, like we know these things in the gospel, then already the gospel is saying that there are oppressed people, right? If I'm going to say something to the oppressed, then it's got to be some oppressed somewhere. And so what is the implication for us in our context for speaking good news to the oppressed? How do we enter into their lives and their space? And there are political implications for that. Particularly if you have my reading of Romans 13 in the American context, right? I think if we are to submit to a government, that is a government of the people and for the people and by the people. If the document that constitutes our government, our Constitution, starts with "we the people," then we are not just observers of this government, we are participants in it. And if we don't acknowledge that and leverage that that power that we have as part of the government, then do we not neglect in some way our responsibility as part of the government and Christians, right? So there are all these different sort of political implications of the gospel, of the scriptures, that I think churches and Christians have to contend with. I don't think that every church has to be political, because again, every congregation is existing in its own context. It's got its own sort of historical context, denominational and fellowship context, congregational context. And so not every congregation needs to do what my congregation does. Not every pastor needs to do what I do. But every believer in every context, not just even in the United States, every believer in every context, everywhere, has to be aware of and wrestle with the political implications of the gospel in their particular context.
Mm-hmm.
So that is all to say, that's where I like to start with folks who are a little skittish about getting involved themselves or seeing involvement around them. It's like, let's not talk about getting in politics, right? Like, let's just talk about what are the political implications of the gospel for us where we are. Like, forget about the meta question of whether the church should be in politics or preaching the gospel or whatever.
That's good.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Chris, I wonder, do you have any ways that people have been surprised at hearing you articulate your Christian faith and the gospel and following Jesus? I think it kind of dovetails off of Alex's question, where many people around us, being in a culture where there's much exposure to what people deem Christian or the church, and whether it's very stereotypical or not, and then finding ways into those conversations where your faith does come out, or you do explicitly represent or speak of Jesus in a way that is actually surprising to people and does some deprogramming to the ways that maybe they had a caricature or assumptions?
I would like to think so. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know that I have a ton of stories of like deep personal transformation.
Yeah, not even
But
necessarily that, but just to like, oh, really? Like you could be a Christian and that? Like,
yeah, I mean,
we're starting
I
to
think
break
all the
apart.
time on on different levels, right? And I think that's very fine. Like I think that God's working in all of us, and ultimately we're all His responsibility. And you know, pastoring a church, we thank God for that. But even like when I ran for Congress, right? A lot of folks in my again in my fellowship, when they saw that I announced my intention to seek the Democratic Party's nomination for a seat in Congress, a lot of people were, how can you like be a Democrat? Like Democrats are so wicked. And so I had a number of conversations, mostly with fellow pastors, right? To sit down and be like, okay, what part of being a Democrat is so bad, right? And got to walk through, like, well, you can be a Democrat and still, support laws that protect unborn children. You can be a Democrat and have a biblical view of marriage. And then, hey, by the way, while we're talking about parties and stuff, what about how we treat the poor and the fact that you have a lot of permanent capital get involved in residential housing market. Which one of these parties, has the better read on that situation, right? So all the time there are opportunities to do that. It also happens on the other side, right? Like, this actually just happened today. I got an email from somebody, and I think I'm talking too much abortion, but this is just what's in my world right now. But I got an email from somebody today raising money for Planned Parenthood. But it was because we had been together on some housing stuff, and the assumption was, well, this guy's out here fighting for affordable housing, so he probably wants to help raise money for Planned Parenthood. And so I had to shoot back a note like, that's not, exactly my, cup of tea. That's not my vibe. And so it happens on both sides. Like sometimes, people inside church, like when we were organizing in Chicago in like 2020, 2021, we're doing a lot of the sort of, police reform advocacy. And there are some folks who were like, it's like, I'm not gonna march with y'all because y'all are like cursing at the police and throwing stuff at them, and I want reform, but that's not my vibe. Why don't you come? We're getting some churches together to march on these same issues. Why don't you come and like see how we march? I'm not saying that is better. Just come see how we march. And so all the time I think there are opportunities to have those types of engagements.
Yeah, no, it's so helpful.
Can I know we're running on time and I'm sensitive to your bedtime there. First off, I just want to like compliment the green carpet. It's like just emanating church vibes.
It is very church.
And
I want it gone, but
we are leaning towards having a focus on the unhoused. And one of the things I was trying to set up this question at the beginning when we were talking about Together Chicago, because in that interview, one of the things that was shared was that when those who build prisons are determining where the next prison is that they're going to build, they look at the schools with the lowest performing like literacy.
Yeah.
And so they're touching on this like school to prison pipeline issue. And so, you know, when I think about the issues of homelessness, of there's my question, to be too brief as possible, is, you know, the idea of educational reform and that being an element of the work that we might want to do in an effort to prevent people from being homeless, 15, 20, 30, 40 years down the road. And just I guess some thoughts on that, and then any other thoughts in terms of policy reform that we might want to consider and read about, educate ourselves on as we approach this.
Yeah, I mean, so education is the policy issue that I've devoted the greatest portion of my own time reading and work. I think it is with sort of the suite of what I would call family supportive policy. The most important thing that we can do in our society, especially, I'm in Chicago and I'm talking to y'all in LA, and having done a lot of work in education. When we had the consulting firm, we primarily worked with education reform organizations across the country. And there is not a large unit school district in America that works. And I think at least I have a burden as a Christian, and I think that it is one that could be shared by a lot of Christians, to do something for children, because if we have done our works of mercy and justice for the least of these, and when we've done them for the least of these, we've literally done them for the Lord. Who among us, is more vulnerable than children? And so I think that it's incredibly important, to work in education. I think that it is urgent for those of us who are in larger metropolitan areas where the schools literally don't work. And I think at some point in the last decade, it's actually switched to where many schools may be actually hurting students more than helping them, academically, socially, emotionally, spiritually, all of the above. And there's a tremendous amount of work to be done there. So I would encourage anybody who's in, especially in a large urban school district, to really have that front and center. I know we do in the Chicago chapter. And in terms of other issues, my other issue set is that suite of what I call family supportive policies, housing and, labor and work issues, right? I think the fact that, that folks can't make a living and house a family is criminal, because those are sort of baseline components of building and structuring the kind of home that can reasonably be expected to produce the kind of people that will, function well in society.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's so good. Chris, it's 8 o'clock. It's like already the wee hours of the morning for you, I think. You're like 24 hours ahead. Well, not 24, like 12 hours ahead of us, way out east in Chicago. We want to get you to bed. Yeah. So great to have you with us. Thank you so much for sharing the wisdom of your big four emphases for following Jesus in the public square and engaging in politics. This is going to be really helpful for us to continue to dialogue about, but then also for future members of the chapter to be able to glean from and all of that. So really, really grateful for your time. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you all. I'm so excited and grateful that y'all are organizing a chapter in LA. I'm actually, a huge fan of Southern California. Mostly because my brother lives out there in San Diego. So, I get to see him sitting on his porch at Christmas in shorts. So,
That's right. You don't do that in Chicago?
Lord knows.
Well, hey,
So,
December 2nd, we're launching. If you want an excuse to come out to Southern California, stop by, see the fam.
We actually kicked it around, but we're actually my wife is due in late November.
Yeah,
so
don't even
that
think
would be
about
a
it then.
bad plan.
That would be a bad plan.
Plan that
Yes.
trip. But I will
Yes.
be cheering y'all on.
I think your family
from
supportive
Chicago.
policies require you to make sure you stay home
For sure.
during that
But
time.
no, I'm super excited, and I'm sure that we'll connect at some point.
Yeah, would love that.
I'll be out in that side of the country.
Would love that. So, all right, friends, thanks for being here. Think that we have a lot of content to chew on and begin to think about as well. I'll stick around if any of you want to kick it around and chat for a bit, but otherwise, it's a wrap. We're done.
Awesome. Well, peace and blessings, everybody.